welcome. It's heartwarming to see such a big turnout tonight. We're sorely missing in-person exhibition launches, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming you again when we can. And thankfully, it does look like the library will be able to open its doors again in the foreseeable future, at least, possibly from the 12th of April, possibly from the 17th of May. We'll certainly be keeping you updated via our newsletter and on our website. Thank you for joining us this evening for the launch of the new exhibition, Death Marches, Evidence and Memory, created by the Holocaust and Genocide Research Partnership. This is a new initiative which brings together the Wiener Holocaust Library, the Holocaust Research Institute at Royal Holloway, University of London, and the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association, based at the Holocaust Exhibition and Learning Centre at the University of Huddersfield. I'd like to thank all of the partners for their collaboration and support. I'm sure most of you are planning to visit Death Marches, Evidence and Memory, either in Huddersfield or in London in person. But if you would like to follow up this evening's online launch by purchasing a catalogue in advance of your visit, please look out for the link in the chat about the library's new online shop, where you'd be able to order a copy of the catalogue for this exhibition. So you'll be hearing this evening from our exhibition's curators, the library's very own Dr. Christine Schmidt and Professor Dan Stone of Royal Holloway. I'm also delighted and honoured that tonight we'll be joined by Susan Pollack MBE, renowned Holocaust educator and survivor of Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. With such eminent and fascinating speakers to follow, it's only proper that I should keep my remarks brief. As I said, I want to thank everyone who's been involved in bringing this important exhibition into being. Congratulations to all of you and thank you. It's really a remarkable piece of work. I'd like to extend particular thanks to the Ernest Hecht Charitable Foundation for their support of this exhibition in particular, and the HGRP initiative as a whole. I'd also like to thank the Holocaust Educational Trust for their assistance in planning this evening's launch event, and also to Imogen Dale, who's played a crucial role. In my comments about the exhibition itself, I want to start by applauding the courage of the curators in choosing this topic, and in doing so, asking us all to confront the terrible reality of the death marches. This is a topic that's difficult to comprehend, not only because of its complexity and its scale, but also because of its horror and cruelty. The sensitive approach taken in the exhibition, focusing on evidence and memory, opens up a space for us to confront that reality with honesty. I'd like to say it's possible to approach this subject unflinchingly too, but perhaps it's only too human to want to look away at times, even from things that we know to be true and necessary to confront. Therefore, I'm grateful to the curators as colleagues and as historians. All of us are, of course, indebted in turn to other historians of the death marches who have gone before them, and to future historians who will come after them. One giant of scholarship in this field of history, Otto Dovkolka, sadly died just a few weeks ago. In 2013, his book, Landscapes of the Metropolis of Death, Dovkolka shared memories of his experience as a child survivor of Auschwitz and of the death march that followed. Anyone who lagged behind the column of prisoners in this march was shot. Dovkolka gave the following unforgettable description of his experience during the death march, of seeing stains in the snow on either side of the road. Death strips on the white snow, coiling all who went into some dark chain, constantly expanding and overtaking the human rivers that moved slowly forward. Within a short time, it became clear to me that every black stain was a prisoner who had been shot and dumped by the roadside. Absorbing and comprehending survivor testimony of the death marches in all its magnitude is no easy task. This exhibition recognises that, and it helps us to face some of the most important issues that might confront us as we strive to listen and to understand the experiences of survivors, however imperfectly. How could this happen? What did the people who witnessed the death marches know about what was going on? What happened to survivors when the death marches eventually came to an end? Evidence, of course, is crucial here, and the library's collections provide us with an unparalleled resource. Memory is invaluable too. Without the slow, unpredictable, often painful or traumatic process in which personal experiences of survivors were shared with others, without that, so much would have been lost. This is not just a question of what we know about the death marches. Dov Kolka had many complex reasons that inspired his work as a historian. For example, in compiling his seminal documentary collection, The Jews in the Secret Nazi Reports on Popular Opinion in Germany. This book overturned long-held false assumptions that ordinary Germans knew very little about the fate of the Jews. It seems possible to me, at least, that this book was informed by what he already knew from his own personal experiences and memories. Our exhibition includes the following quote from Ernst Israel Bornstein, author of The Long Night. It gives us a brief glimpse into what living with the memories of the death marches might have been like for survivors. Often, when I am half asleep, I wake with a start. They frequently appear before me, grey, shaven figures with sightless eyes, staring into the distance, waiting for a bullet to the head. I see how they sit at the roadside, the small, dark hole at the temple, the thin, hesitant trickle of blood. I wait for them to speak, to moan, but they sit there motionless and then silently fall forwards. Death Marches, Evidence and Memory is the first ever Wiener Holocaust Library exhibition, simultaneously being mounted in London and in the north of England. For that to happen, we have benefited from outstanding cooperation through the Holocaust and Genocide Research Partnership that has really made this exhibition possible. This has included amazing support from the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association and the Holocaust Exhibition and Learning Centre at the University of Huddersfield, where the exhibition will also be mounted. Bringing together unparalleled collections and academic expertise in 4 organisations, the Wiener Holocaust Library, the Holocaust Research Institute at Royal Holloway, the Huddersfield Exhibition and Learning Centre, and the University of Huddersfield, creates the UK's foremost research body into the history of the Holocaust and other genocides. And I'm delighted that we're joined this evening by Dr. Chelsea Soundballs and Dr. Alessandro Bucci, who have been leading the northern arm of this joint enterprise. And I'm delighted that they will be joining us this evening, and we'll begin tonight's event by hearing from them. So I'll hand over to Dr. Alessandro Bucci.
Thank you very much, Toby, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep it brief, as I'm sure we're all looking forward to hear from the curators. We are delighted to join you tonight to share a little bit about our centre in Huddersfield. I am Dr. Alessandro Bucci, and along Dr. Chelsea Soundballs, I am a co-director of the Holocaust Exhibition and Learning Centre and the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association in Huddersfield. In the mid-1990s, a remarkable group of Holocaust survivors came together and founded the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association. The HSFA continues to support unique communities of individuals who were persecuted by the Nazi regime and in various different ways fled or resettled in the north of England after the war. They established their lives in Britain and particularly in the north of England. And this is why Huddersfield was chosen as the perfect location for giving a permanent home to their legacy. In 2018, the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association created an exhibition and learning centre at the University of Huddersfield, which is the only venue of its kind to exist within a university campus in the UK.
Thanks, Alessandro. We are immensely proud of our collections and exhibition, which features the stories of 16 survivors and is supported by a diverse and engaging learning program. As you'll see in the short film tonight, our collections, featuring the harrowing and extraordinary stories of these survivors, helps us to achieve our goal to tell a global history through local stories. The Death Marches exhibition features also the remarkable story of Eugene Black, who is the father of our previous chair, Lillian Black. Lillian sadly passed away this last year, but her outstanding dedication to the HSFA and her father's legacy has ensured that we will never forget the importance of listening to survivors tell their stories. When the pandemic is over and things get back to normal, we invite each of you to please come and visit us when you're next in Yorkshire. You can come see for yourselves how the stories from our local survivors, such as Eugene Black or Ibby Knill or John Schlag, and others show an important side to the death marches and to the Holocaust. And I will now pass it off to Christine, Dr. Christine Schmidt at the Wiener Library.
It's okay, I don't mind the uplift, Chelsea. Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you, of course, to everyone for gathering this evening, and thank you to Toby for chairing and introducing this event. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our gallery walkthrough film, which I hope gives a sense of the exhibition, which I found both tremendously rewarding and incredibly challenging to curate due to the difficulty of the subject matter, which I think Toby has set the stage very well about. I've been researching and working in the field of Holocaust studies for more than 20 years, and it's certainly not easy to work in this field, to say the least. But as I've been reminded once again in curating this exhibition, there are still elements within this history that are profoundly and deeply disturbing. And I think I speak for my co-curator, Dan Stone, in saying that this particular chapter of that history is one from which it is very difficult, if not impossible, to draw lessons, none that provide any comfort in any case. In light of ongoing pandemic restrictions, we hope that this film provides a good overview of what we've tried to do and to give you a sense of the exhibition. And we'll also be launching a series of events, including talks with survivor Ibby Knill, whose story features in the exhibition, as you'll see, as well as lectures, panels, and workshops, hopefully mostly virtual, perhaps some in person if we can do it. These will be soon to be announced, so please keep checking our website. But before I begin the film, I just want to say a few notes of gratitude. On behalf of my co-curator, Dan, I'd like to thank my colleagues at the library who contributed immensely to the creation of this exhibition, from reading proofs, cataloging and finding documents, providing translations, and organizing events and other administrative support. In particular, I'd like to thank especially Barbara Warnock, Toby, Howard Falkson, and Roxy Baker for their constructive comments very early on, and to Imogen DeLille for her tireless support and enthusiasm for the project. We'd also, of course, like to thank Chelsea, Alessandro, and Alex, their colleague at the HSFA, for their tremendous work in adapting the exhibition for their space, and for being able to include even more survivors' voices and experiences in that version. We're really looking forward to seeing it in person in Huddersfield, and I hope anyone tuning in from Yorkshire will have an opportunity to see that in person as soon as you can. We had the pleasure of working once again with Kate at Bivouac Design, whose compelling designs have helped us present information both accessibly and sensitively, and we want to thank her for her creativity, patience, and support. This is definitely not an easy subject to portray, and Kate has, as always, done a magnificent job. Likewise, we'd like to thank Paula Atkinson, who worked on the 3D staging in Huddersfield, as well as Stephen Morris, who designed the catalog. We'll provide further information about ordering the catalog in the chat. If you haven't seen that information, I've put it in the chat, but I will include it again before the end of the event in case it gets scrolled down. And finally, I'd especially like to acknowledge and thank the significant work of Kate Docking, who has joined us tonight. I saw in the crowd. Kate is a PhD student at the University of Kent who has contributed a great amount of support and research to this exhibition and curated a section on post-war justice. We're grateful to the Consortium for the Humanities and the Arts Southeast England, or CHASE, who made her placement at the library possible. We have a series of shorter films, which we're also going to be showing in the weeks leading up to the opening of the exhibition, and Kate will be talking in one of those films about the panel that she curated. So please be on the lookout for that. So we do hope everyone will get a chance to visit the exhibition, perhaps in May. And in the meantime, we hope that this film introduces you to its key themes. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it will work.
My name's Toby Simpson, and I'm the director of the Wiener Holocaust Library. I'm very proud to be introducing this film about our next exhibition, Death Marches, Evidence and Memory. When I first came to the Wiener Holocaust Library, I was using its collections as a student. And at that time, the library only had a small display case to show its amazing collections. Today, we have a wonderful building in Russell Square, London, where there's a reading room and a dedicated exhibition space. It's extremely exciting that this year will be the first year when the library will be showing its collections through exhibitions, not only in London, but also in Huddersfield at the Exhibition and Learning Centre, created by the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association.
Welcome to the exhibition, Death Marches, Evidence and Memory. I'm Dan Stone, I'm Professor of Modern History and Director of the Holocaust Research Institute at Royal Holloway, University of London, and together with Dr. Christine Schmidt of the Wiener Holocaust Library, we have co-curated this exhibition. The exhibition aims to illustrate and bring to light a little known aspect of the Holocaust, that's to say the forced evacuations, which the concentration camp inmates themselves called death marches, which took place at the very last stages of the war as the Allies, primarily the Red Army, were approaching the concentration camps. What we've tried to do in the exhibition is to show not only the routes of the death marches themselves, but to show how, after the war, the Allies responded to them in terms of confronting local civilians with the crimes committed by the Nazis, trying to bring perpetrators to justice, and to show how, over the years, the death marches have been commemorated.
The exhibition not only tells the history of the death marches, but also how evidence was gathered after the war and how history has been written about the death marches. Okay, so we begin the exhibition with a look at an overview of the death marches and what they were, but we also include information about the types of evidence that was gathered to be able to understand what happened. And we really want to show how we know what we know about the death marches with this exhibition. So for example, we start with a story of Eugene Black, who was born Janusz Schwarz, and who was deported in 1944 from Hungary to Auschwitz-Birkenau. He was selected for forced labor in Germany and was sent to Mittelbau-Dora after being sent to Buchenwald, and then survived several death marches. And we include his story in the exhibition. And he was eventually evacuated towards Bergen-Belsen, so we include images of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, but also maps that were hand-drawn during the investigations after the war. And we want to show that the maps are only a partial story of the death marches and the experience of the death marches. So we try to combine different types of evidence to provide a fuller history of the marches.
I would say middle of March 1945. We were assembled, lined up, and we were marched to a place called Nordhausen, onto the railway line. Here again, the wagons were waiting for us. We were cramped in, the train set off. There was still snow. We were on that journey from one end of Germany right up to Hamburg for 7 days. Every so often, which it must have been prearranged by the SS, the train would pull up and the doors would open and we had to throw the dead bodies out. And there were fellow prisoners outside picking them up, putting it onto carts.
This section of the exhibition takes a thematic approach to the history of the death marches, looking first at the witnesses who encountered the death marches, moving into post-war confrontation and investigation of the death marches by the Allies. And then we move into war crimes trials, where by and large, perpetrators of the death marches were not tried.
So in January 1945, there were about 714,000 concentration camp inmates, the majority of whom were forced on death marches, these forced evacuations from the camps in the face of the advance of the Red Army. Trying to map those marches is extremely complicated, and with this display we wanted to give a sense of the confusion and the complexity of the death marches, but without it becoming too incomprehensible. So we haven't shown everything here. There aren't, for example, details of the marches to Bergen-Belsen, but we've chosen 4 examples from Buchenwald, Gross-Rosen, Stutthof and Auschwitz in order to demonstrate how complex these marches were. There was not a single march. There were different convoys of inmates left at different times. Sometimes the single convoys split and then rejoined again. Sometimes they were taken to a particular place, such as Mikołów or Gliwice, and then put on trains to go further west. Sometimes they marched on foot the whole way. So the aim here was simply to give a sense to viewers of the death marches as a single phenomenon, but breaking it down a little bit and to show how each individual forced evacuation was a very complex process. So in this section of the exhibition, Confrontation, we wanted to show what happened when the death marches passed through the villages and towns of Germany. So we see on the one hand how local inhabitants responded to the death marches, most of all by looking away, but occasionally trying to help. But we also see what happened later when particularly the American troops came across sites where massacres had taken place in various places across Germany. So, for example, in Neuenburg, they found many bodies strewn around, and in the case and on the photos, we see what happened afterwards. The American soldiers forced the local German civilians to exhume the bodies, to build coffins for them, and to prepare them for a proper burial, which was then conducted by the American soldiers. We also see here the response of some of the Jewish displaced persons, the survivors, because in the DP camps after the war, the first survivor accounts were taken, the first testimonies recorded, and in this example from Munich in 1947 in Von letzten Röben, which was the journal produced in one of the Munich DP camps, we see an account of the death march from Buchenwald. So the survivors spoke when they could about the death marches and produced the first accounts which we have. So one of the things that we show here is this photograph of an American soldier standing over the bodies of victims of one of the death marches from Flossenbürg, bodies discovered at Neuenburg vom Wald in Upper Bavaria. And one of the things that we debated was whether to show atrocity photographs in the exhibition or not. And so we decided, obviously, that an exhibition about death marches couldn't go ahead without using some of these kinds of photographs. But we invite visitors to the exhibition to consider the use of atrocity photographs and to think about the ethics of reproducing images of dead bodies as a tool of historical research.
We have examples of early projects to record survivor testimonies and to talk about their experiences. And it's actually not true that survivors weren't speaking about their experiences after the war, and we wanted to talk about how and to show that this was not true. So we've included examples of testimonies and also images that show the physical devastation that survivors experienced on the death marches. This is an example of an account that was published in a newspaper by the Association of Persecutees of the Nazi Regime, or VVN in German. And it was an account by a political prisoner named Henri Michel, which was published in 1947. So this is the backside of an image that we show on the panel of Solomon Silverstein, who was a survivor of a death march. And he survived after being shot in the head and left for dead. And this picture was taken by the US Army Signal Corps in 1945. This group of images is a group of images of the Sepp sisters who were forced into a ghetto in 1939. And they were then sent to a subcamp of Gross-Rosen. They were evacuated on a death march, and they both survived. But this image shows Fela Sepps in May 1945 in a field hospital in Volari, and she died the day after this image was taken.
So one of the things that the occupation authorities did very soon after the end of the war was to order all the new Bürgermeister, or the mayors of villages and towns across Germany, to supply them with information about where non-Germans had been killed or died in their vicinity. They had to file reports to the Allied authorities, and they also provided cemetery maps showing where non-Germans had been buried in local cemeteries. Most of them are fairly straightforward drawings, but some of them, as for example this one on the show from a cemetery in Hanover, are quite colourful and have all sorts of strange and curious details in them. This one in particular is rather gruesome, showing the smoking chimneys in the background and other curious details. So there are many of these sorts of maps in the archives. The Allies established the Central Tracing Bureau, which is the body that later became the International Tracing Service. And one of the first things it did was to send workers out into the field to retrace the steps of the death marches. And they reproduced maps such as this one of the death march from Flossenbürg, which shows in great detail where the inmates of the concentration camp passed through. And they also tried on the way through a program that they called the Graves Recheck program to try and identify dead bodies. One of the things that's little known about is the extent to which former inmates of the camp themselves tried to set up committees which would help people trace their relatives. The archives of these bodies have since been absorbed into the International Tracing Service. But one of the most important was set up at Dachau by a former Polish inmate called Walter Cieślik, who with a couple of other colleagues, also former inmates, established the International Information Office. And for a couple of years after the war, the records which they'd saved from the camp were crucial in assisting people find out about what had happened to their loved ones at Dachau.
So this panel, we wanted to talk about ongoing research and commemoration of the death marches. And there's some really interesting examples that we wanted to show about how the death marches are commemorated, some through pilgrimages. So for example, we show a poster that was recreated by the March of the Living, wherein they recreate the death marches but try to change the meaning of the march. And you can see that there's this poster that's been created for an exhibition that they did. We also show the way historians and other researchers are conducting research on foot, recreating the paths of the death marches. So we have examples of research that's being conducted and forensic evidence that's being gathered. We also talk about the ways in which survivors themselves retraced the paths of the death marches. In the case, we show a pamphlet that was created by two French survivors of the Flossenbürg death march, wherein in 1991, they followed the path that they had actually been on in which they survived. And they took photographs of memorials and the lack of memorials along the way. And in this section, we show some of the innovative ways that historians and geographers are researching the death marches or the paths of the death marches. And this is a recognition that maps can only show us a bit of information about the paths that people took, but these representations talk about different ways to represent the experiences of people who survived on the death marches. And we close this panel with Ibi Knill's story. She was also a survivor of the death marches, and this is in recognition that it's been a fairly recent phenomenon that historians and other scholars have incorporated survivor accounts in histories of the death marches.
So they took the train away, and the following evening, they started to march us towards Bergen-Belsen. And they marched us during the nighttime and hid us in barns in the daytime. We could hear a lot of air raid activity going on around it, and every time that happened, in the dark we were hidden. In the daytime they couldn't see us. After about 3-4 days, and I was getting the feeling personally that we were going around in circles. And anybody who had lagged behind, a soldier detached himself, and we just heard a shot and the soldier came back and the other person didn't.
We're back on site, we're back at our Exhibition Learning Centre on the campus of the University of Huddersfield, and we've just finished installing Death Marches, the very first exhibition by the Holocaust and Genocide Research Partnership. As a founding member of the HGRP, we are especially proud of this project. Our collection, our exhibition, and the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association tell the history of the Holocaust from the perspective of a group of survivors and refugees who made their lives in the north of England as members of local communities. As such, we are unique, and in that we tell a global history via local stories. Everything that we do, from our learning program to the development of our collection, to our exhibition, to our public activities, is underpinned by the experiences of this group of survivors and refugees who founded the HSFA in the mid-90s. For them, the HSFA was a safe space where they could share their experiences of the Nazi era and after. Eugene Black, Ibi Neal, John Schlag, whose testimonies are present in this exhibition just behind me, are also three of the founding members of the HSFA, and this is why this exhibition for us feels so special.
We look forward to welcoming you to the exhibition either in London or in Huddersfield as pandemic conditions permit. Thank you for watching.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Imogen Diel, and I am the Programme Coordinator for the Holocaust and Genocide Research Partnership. Just a quick housekeeping point. Towards the end of tonight's event, there will be a chance to put your questions to our speakers. If you can please write these in the chat. If you can include who you'd like them to be directed to as well, that will make it slightly easier to pose questions, and I will put these forward to our speakers. And as you've seen and heard this evening, as well as academic research, survivor testimony is an integral part of this exhibition, as of course it should be. And to that end, I'm honoured this evening to be able to introduce Susan Pollack MBE to share part of her testimony. Susan was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau from her native Hungary in May 1944. She was 13 at the time, but upon arrival was advised to give her age as 15, thus avoiding immediate selection for the gas chambers. After around 10 weeks in the camp, Susan was sent to work as a slave labourer in an armaments factory in Guben, a small town in Germany, and it was from there she was sent on a death march. So without further ado, I would like to invite Susan to share her story with us from this point, and then after this we will take questions for all our speakers. So over to you, Susan. Oh, sorry, Susan, I think you're still muted. There we go.
Yeah, now I'm ready. I'm most impressed with the amount of work and the extensive information that you provided, and I look forward to actually seeing it myself. And I'm very grateful for it all, because as far as I know, death marches, the death marches really hadn't been given very much disclosure up to this point. And it was a very important period in my life. Let me just tell you a little bit about what happened to the Hungarian Jews mostly, and not only the Jews, but there were the Romans and many others involved. We had a terrible time. My family, my brother, one brother, my parents, we suffered in Hungary long before we were transported. So when the idea was presented to us that we're going to be resettled, we had no idea where or how, but we decided anything would be better than suffering in Hungary. So my father was taken away earlier, and I hadn't seen him since. We weren't allowed to travel and use the public transport. And then it came our turn, my mom, my brother, and my own turn, to be ready for the following morning. Where to? No one would divulge any information. And so that was the beginning of it, of the whole year of suffering, of being left on my own, not knowing what was going on and why. And at first, We were taken from Hungary, from this ghetto. We were taken by cattle train to a place to Auschwitz. That's another long story. I've only got a few minutes to talk about the death marches, so I won't go into that. I was separated from my mum in Auschwitz. And what did I do there? Nothing. Being selected the whole time. Being looked upon. Am I still useful for slave labor? On one occasion, yes, I was selected. But the feelings were gone. Thoughts were not in my head anymore. I was totally distant. I was incapable of fathom out. Where am I? What is going on? Well, Auschwitz. After Auschwitz, I had been passed by Dr. Mengele, stark naked. We all were, all the girls, and sent to a working camp, slave labor camp. The conditions had improved somewhat, and but it didn't last very long. As the Allied forces were coming closer, nobody explained that we're going to be transported somewhere. Nobody spoke to us. Nobody could speak amongst us anymore. We were incapable of thinking rationally. We were just walking. And that is what was expected of us, walking. Walking in the winter, in the bitter cold. At the end of 1944, and we walked out. No adequate clothes, of course. Many of us didn't even have shoes. There was no report, they can't complain, but that we knew. Because if we were speaking, that was a big crime. So we were just without a voice in the bitter cold. And no food along the way. A long walk. A long walk. What was it like? Well, there was no food distribution at all. There were long, this was particularly long row of girls mostly. I haven't seen any young boys there. And we walked, and when we suspected that perhaps we're not being noticed, we started digging out from the places where we had been taken, the places, the frozen fields. We never crossed any villages. We've never entered any villages. It was just frozen fields. And we were scrambling for food. Desperation was all we knew. And when we had been found to do this, hoping to find a few potatoes, raw potatoes, or other vegetables perhaps, we were shot along the way, and the bodies were left there. And that was a death march. The death march actually was at the end of our suffering. And we knew that few of us will survive, perhaps. But it didn't matter anymore. We were abandoned totally. So it went on for a long time. freezing cold weather, no adequate clothes, as I've said. Where did we sleep, if you could call it sleep? Well, when we were lucky, we found a place, or they told us to go into the barns on the farm. And that was a few times. In the majority of the time of walking, no, we slept outdoors as well. And those who could not keep up with the walk that the Nazis set up, the speed, they were shot along the way. That's a death march. Well, the Allied forces were not far, but they weren't quick enough to help us. It was just pure luck that the British army came. And I can't tell you exactly how long it took. It seemed to me interminable. We arrived in Belsen after such a long, treacherous walk. Few of us, most of us, did not make it. And we did not, what was the attitude? Not that I can even say attitude, because we were just zombies. And we walked into Bergen-Belsen, a place of death. After those long, long days, it's a miracle that any of us could survive. Absolutely. I can't really tell you. I mean, there was this long, monotonous walk, endless walk, leading on to nowhere. So what was Bergen-Belsen like? Death all over. And nobody cleaned up. I was placed, and a few of us placed in a barrack. And there was no food distribution. There was no cleanliness at all. The filth, no wonder we had typhoid, everybody. Typhoid, tetanus, tuberculosis I suffered from, severe malnutrition, severe total destruction, human destruction. And the conditions were so dreadful that I had to crawl out. I was unable to walk. I crawled out, and that's where I wanted to die, unconsciously. And this British army had organized a rescue mission for those who showed a sign of life. And I felt a gentle hand lifting me up. And that was an incredible feeling, that actually kindness survived after that year of such cruelty, such fearfulness, such indescribable pain. And he placed me in a small ambulance, which they organized very quickly. They took me, it was the Nazi officers' place before. They converted that to the survivors' rescue place. They cleaned us, they called in the local German women, mostly. Showed them, look at what your Führer has done. I could understand some German. look at this tragedy of so many people. So they washed us. They were made to clean us. They shaved our heads because the hair grew back within a year, of course. And gradually, the food that was given to us, sometimes it was too much. So we got sick from that too. But gradually, we started living, but not comprehending. Not that took a long time. Comprehension, trust, decency. And these were the early memories from Germany and Poland. Perhaps some of you might want to know, how can you continue living after such an event, knowing no, you haven't got anyone left. I had no hopes. I knew my mom was taken to the camp in Auschwitz and gassed. I knew also that my father was murdered in Auschwitz with all the men who were taken long before I was. So the life afterwards, if you can call it. I'm only 14 years old. I've lost my education because the Jewish students or the Jewish children in Hungary, in the villages, I'm not from Budapest, in the villages, they were unable to go, they weren't accepted in schools anymore. And my years after 10 really concentrated on fearfulness, on wanting to disappear, to become shadows. And so I'm just sorry, I'm looking at the time, I was given 10 minutes. So the death march, yes, death marches were an important part for us survivors, because it sort of shaped our lives to I would like to say to appreciate life afterwards, but it wasn't that easy. And so what you have done, or what you, that sort of emphasis given to the death marches is so important, so important. I mean, we can't actually recreate the feelings I had in Auschwitz. That is impossible. Human beings, children, useful for a while, and naked, marching in front of Mengele. And so because I was very sick, and many of the survivors were similar. Well, can't say many, some, few. We were taken for recovery to Sweden, neutral country. And they helped us, the Swedish government helped us to recover. And recovery consisted, I think that was a very important sort of role that it played in our lives, is we listened to music in the evening, classical music. And that gave us some feelings, moved us. I've been speaking to schools now for some 30 years, telling them about my my history, and mainly about anti-Semitism, the 10 stages of anti-Semitism that we experienced. And so I can go on, but I think I'm, 10 minutes perhaps is up soon. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Trying to understand how that is possible. How was that possible? In a country, Germany, country of culture and progression, and to create such a bedlam, such an indescribable situation. And I haven't come to terms with it yet. But I'm building upon it. So do ask me, please. If I can answer, I'll be very glad to do so.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm sure we could all sit here for hours listening to your testimony. And even though we can't all be in the same room together, it nevertheless has such incredible power. And just looking at the comments in the chat, lots and lots of people saying the same thing, and really, really thank you. We do have time for a few questions. First of all, we've actually had lots of comments and lots of questions about finding information on specific death marches. So thank you to everyone who shared their personal connections to the death marches. I wonder if maybe Christine, you could comment on where people might be able to find or might start looking for information on some of these death marches.
Well, I can comment on the source that we've found to be the most helpful and that has the most information, which is the ITS digital archive, which is now called the Errolson Archives. And there is some information about this actually accessible to you online, and I'll put the link to that that archive in the chat in just a moment. We of course also have expert researchers on our staff who can help you navigate the material. Not everything is online, of course, but I can certainly provide information how to submit an inquiry to our research staff, who can help support you in your research and with your questions. We will also save this chat just to make sure that anybody who's asked us to email them afterward, we will be sure to do so. But thank you for that question. I think there was actually a specific question that Dan might be able to answer on Landeshut. Dan, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I can do that. Landeshut was one of the subcamps of Gross-Rosen, and Gross-Rosen itself, which had about 100 subcamps, was one of the largest concentration camps by the end of 1944, had about 76,000 inmates, I think, altogether. So over 10% or so of the entire concentration camp population. And about 35 to 40 of those subcamps were not evacuated, but were liberated by the Red Army in May 1945, and Landeshut was one of them. There had been an attempted evacuation in February, which failed, and then I think on May the 7th, the guards announced that there would be an evacuation the next day, which got as far as Libavka, which is not very far away from the camp, and then the guards ran off and left the inmates to themselves, basically. So that's why there were people still at Landeshut when the Soviets arrived on 8th or 9th of May. In terms of finding information, I would say the place to start for that particular subcamp is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos, which you can download for free on the USHMM website. And I think in volume 1, you'll find information about Gross-Rosen and about all of the subcamps. And that will also contain references to further places to look for more information.
Thanks, Dan. Question from Michael Sharp, actually a couple of questions which are kind of more practical in nature. He asks if there's a significant difference between the exhibition in London and the exhibition in Huddersfield, and also with pandemic restrictions, how long will the exhibition be on display? perhaps if Alessandro or Chelsea want to take this one for Huddersfield.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you know, museums and galleries are not allowed to open just yet. We think that will happen in line with the library in reality. And yes, we want to give the opportunity to as many people as possible to come and see the exhibition. And for this reason, we've kept the closing date very, very flexible, and we'll work in line with what we are allowed to do. But it will stay open for when we will be able to do so.
Just to add to what Alessandro has said, one of the things that's slightly different from the exhibition in London is that we pulled on the voices and experiences of some of our survivors. You've heard about Eugene Black and Ibby Cannell. We feature them a little bit more in depth, as well as John Shalag. John Shalag was liberated from Buchenwald, and he's actually one of the few gentlemen that's in a very iconic photo of Buchenwald at that time. Although even he says he's not quite sure if that actually looked, or he said that he didn't feel that that actually looked like him, but apparently it was. So we go into a bit more detail about the experiences of survivors and their experiences of the death marches in Huddersfield.
Okay, Christine, did you want to say anything perhaps about how long the exhibition is running from the library as well?
For the library, we are hoping to have it up throughout the summer. It's sort of open-ended as well, and we're hoping to open to our readers next month in April as that's allowed, and again in May, but we'll have to see, and hopefully over the summer, anybody who wants to see it will have the opportunity to do so. Fingers crossed.
Thank you. So just, I think we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. So I've got a couple of questions or a question for Susan that a couple of people have asked. They asked, have you been back to your home village, or has your village ever invited you back since the war? Oh, hang on, sorry, Susan, just gotta unmute you. Oh, no. Sorry, Susan, if you just press the button to unmute.
Unmute.
There we go. Yep, we've got you.
That's good. Thank you. The village hasn't. No, they haven't. But my brother survived, and he found me through the Red Cross at the time. He went back to Hungary, and he died some years ago. But he chose to go. It's not that he chose to go back, but he wasn't able to go anywhere else. He wanted to go to Israel now, but he wasn't able to do that. He was psychologically, he was very severely affected, as he was used in the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando group, actually, many of them shoveled out the bodies from the gas chamber into the oven, and that's what he was doing. So he never fully recovered. Yeah.
Another question for Susan from Patrick Davey. He says, what do you think, or what did you think of the Germans then? What do you think of them now? And do you believe in individual or collective guilt, or is that not a helpful way of looking at things?
Well, I do accept that there were German, not Jews, who were helpful. You can't say everybody was a Nazi, but they were helpful. It didn't happen to me, but I would imagine that that it played an important role in some people's lives. What do I think of them? I don't forgive. They have to forgive themselves. I was on a trial in Oscar Groening trial in Germany a few years back. And there was sitting, he was in his 70s, late 70s. years old, and he was actually taking out the arrivals, the victims, their pockets, examined, and took everything they had before they were actually made to go into the camps. He didn't know. He followed. That was his defense. He followed the order line. Obedience, I'm thinking, or were they, many of them, were they hoping to get a promotion? A promotion. That was their driving force, many of them. Today, let me just say this, anti-Semitism hasn't disappeared yet. And unfortunately, that's why I'm so grateful to you that you're showing the evidence of what took place. But it is going in the right direction. Everything takes time, perhaps, but we're impatient. And so the worry is, as we had been speaking to schools and other places, I mean, I went to Rwanda to speak, try to encourage those whose families were murdered, and they continued living there. I was sent to India to give a talk, and various other places. Now that we're not in Brexit anymore, well, I was speaking there at the political gathering. I think it was in Germany. So many of us had done quite a lot, and hopefully it will go on. Just had my 90th birthday not long ago. So things are hopefully moving on in the right direction.
Okay, I'm aware that we are running slightly over time. I'm going to take one more question, and I apologise if we haven't been able to answer your question this evening. Susan, this is one more question for you from Chelsea Sambles. She says that in your testimony, you said after the war, you felt like you needed to hide for 10 years or so. And from where she's sitting, you're no longer hiding. So what happened in your life that brought you back from that feeling of needing to hide?
Thank you for asking me. I got married very young. I was able to have children. And when we managed to create a little bit of security, I became a Samaritan for many years. Can I help you getting the telephone calls? That's what helped me very much. Listening and understanding the difficulties. And I did a few other charity work. But getting back my self-esteem, that took a long time. I was 60 years old when I got my degree. So at various stages. And sometimes I think it will never leave me, nor do I want it to go. But the concern, who is going to do it after we're gone? But it's very satisfying to learn that that your exhibition reaches so many people. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Susan. I think that's a really good point for me to pass on to my colleague, Professor Dan Stone, just to say a few words for closing.
Thanks, Imogen. Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to everybody who's attended tonight. I really hope you'll get the opportunity to visit the exhibition either in London or in Huddersfield in person in due course. And to say thank you to Christine and my other colleagues in London and in Huddersfield for all the assistance with this exhibition. It's been challenging, but also a pleasure to work on, to work with little known archives, to try and bring to light material that is still not really incorporated properly into the history of the Holocaust, and so that's been very satisfying to do that. And finally, to say once again thank you to Susan for an extraordinarily moving talk, and for her powerful and beautiful and funny comments in light of the questions. So thank you all so much for coming, and hope to see everybody at some point soon.